Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Simons. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our weekly convocation brought to you by Monte Vista Grove Homes. I always like to acknowledge and thank Jonas Streffer, who's our tech person from San Marino Community Church. And a reminder right at the beginning that if you're not speaking, please mute yourself so that we don't get extra things coming in that are not part of the program. One of the amazing things to me about these convocations is the variety of what we've done. And just in the last month and a half, we've had a look at the January 6th election with Peter Wehner. We've gone from that to the legacy of Martin Luther King with Gerald Rivers. Jim Bridges then talked about people changing America. And then the digital transformation of the church with Doug Strong and Michael Paulus. And then just last week, a wonderful program with Perry Hayes, music composed and written by African Americans. And then coming to today, a love poem, the love poems of William Butler Yeats and Irish Valentine. And so to me, it's appropriate that when we think about the love poems of Yeats, we look at the love poem of Paul to the church at Corinth 2,000 years ago, the 13th chapter, the 4th to the 7th verses. And this is from the Message translation. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Love doesn't have a swelled head. Love doesn't force itself on others. It isn't always me first. Doesn't fly off the handle. Doesn't keep score of the sins of others. Doesn't revel when others grovel. Takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. Puts up with anything. Trusts God always. Always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going to the end. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let us pray together. We pray to you, O God, as our source, our guide, our goal. We live in dark times, but your love shines in the darkness. Help us keep our priorities clear, reaching out to the lonely, visiting the sick, encouraging those who have lost their way, building bridges of understanding where there is division. Oh God, we pray for three things: that we may trust steadily in you, that we may hope unswervingly, that we may love extravagantly. And the greatest of these is love. Amen. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome today, first of all, Nancy Macky, who has presented a number of convocations in the past, most of them being readers' theater, looking at classic pieces of literature and then presenting them in a dramatic reading. And so that's what's going to happen today with Nancy and Tom Erickson. Nancy is a retired English professor from Westminster College in Western Pennsylvania, twice visiting scholar at Oxford University's Graduate College, Wolfson. And she's been a reader at the Huntington Library for 14 years, assisting historian and Monte Vista resident Ron White. Tom Erickson will also be presenting today as a interpreter of the poems of Yeats. Tom has been minister at two places in Washington State, in Southern California, in Scottsdale, Arizona, Washington, D.C., and finally at Springfield, Missouri. He is indeed one of the great preachers in the Presbyterian Church in the USA. And one thing I love about Tom Erickson, he's intellectually curious. He's always looking for some new thought, some new idea. So it's indeed a pleasure to welcome Nancy and Tom for an Irish Valentine.
An Irish Valentine. If I were a betting woman instead of a careful Episcopalian, I'd wager that not many of us would want our most passionate loves, our most painful frustrations, our rejections and failures to be published for the whole English-speaking world to see. Fortunately, Irishman William Yates was not like us. Here's Yates. He pressed his passions into words, gave them wings into the world. And in 1923, they brought back to him the Nobel Prize for Literature. His wife, Georgie, whom he married in his early 50s, thought he revealed so much of his soul in his work that she called him William Tell. Today, let's listen to Yeats's many open-hearted loves for the land of Ireland, for friends, and particularly for one stubborn woman. Maybe you could use lines from some of his poems in your Valentines next week. William Butler Yeats was born in the year our Civil War ended, 1865. His passion for Ireland's independence from England was tempered by his dismay in 1920 that Ireland was losing its way. A few lines from his perhaps most famous poem, The Second Coming, warns about straying from our traditional values. The Irish people were like an upward circling falcon, losing its bearings far from its safe trainer toward a dangerous future. Can we use these lines today for America? The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Here is the Lake Isle of Innisfree in Ireland. Yeats often found comfort by turning to a more stable love, Ireland's beauty. In the Lake Isle of Innisfree, he imagines building a safe refuge where he will never be threatened. The bird mentioned here, the linnet, is a common symbol of a lost way of life, the Lake Isle of Innisfree.
I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, For always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray. I hear it in the deep heart's core.
One of Yates's lifelong friend loves was for Lady Augusta Gregory, an older English noblewoman who gave him space in her vast West Ireland estate, Cool Park, to live and to write. Her granddaughter, Anne Gregory, had abundant blonde hair. In this poem, the young girl pleads to be loved for herself, not for her beautiful hair. Cascading curls that covered her ears, he calls ramparts, or Anne Gregory.
Never shall a young man, thrown into despair by those great honey-colored ramparts at your ear, love you for yourself alone and not your yellow hair.
But I can get a hair dye and a set such color there, brown or black or carrot, that young men in despair may love me for myself alone and not my yellow hair.
I heard an old religious man but yesternight declare that he had found a text to prove that only God, my dear, could love you for yourself alone and not your yellow hair.
Yeats also loved his close friends. In the next poem, we're given a glimpse of deep conversations he had with some of them. Two women and he are discussing different kinds of work. Work is Adam's curse. You in the poem is his lifelong love obsession, Maud Gunn. We'll meet her soon. Adam's curse.
We sat together at one summer's end, that beautiful, mild woman, your close friend, and you and I, and talked of poetry. I said, a line will take us hours, maybe. Yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Better go down upon your marrow bones and scrub a kitchen pavement, or break stones like an old pauper in all kinds of weather. For to articulate sweet sounds together is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler by the noisy set. That beautiful woman replied,
To be born woman is to know, although they do not talk of it at school, that we must labor to be beautiful.
I had a thought for no one's but your ears, that you were beautiful, and that I strove to love you in the old high way of love, that it had all seemed happy, and yet we'd grown as weary-hearted as that hollow moon.
This is a 19th century British brown penny. How many of us in our youth flipped a coin to decide, she loves me not? Well, young Willie Yates does the same with a brown penny in The Young Man's Song.
I whispered, I am too young, and then, I am old enough. Wherefore I threw a penny to find out if I might love.
Go and love, young man, if the lady be young and fair.
Ah, penny, brown penny, brown penny, I am looped in the loops of her hair. Oh, love is the crooked thing. There is nobody wise enough to find out all that is in it. For he would be thinking of love till the stars had run away and the shadows eaten the moon. Ah, penny, brown penny, one cannot begin it too soon.
Here she is. This is Maud Gunn. Some of his best cherished poetry is filled with frustration that one consistently stubborn Irish radical woman would not marry him. She insisted that their spirits were married, and that was enough. Maud Gunn was widely said to be the most beautiful woman in Ireland, and she had many suitors. Her greatest passion was for Ireland's independence from England. Willie joined her in this cause, but his greatest passion was for Maud. He proposed to her 5 times over several years, and she refused him every time. Her stubbornness prompted his deeply moving love poems that are his legacy to us. In his longing again and again, he took up his pen in a poet to his beloved.
I bring you with reverent hands the books of my numberless dreams. White woman, that passion has worn as the tide wears the dove-gray sands, and with heart more old than the horn that is brimmed from the pale fire of time. White woman, with numberless dreams, I bring you my passionate rhyme.
And he gives his beloved certain rhymes.
Fasten your hair with a golden pin and bind up every wandering tress. I bade my heart build these poor rhymes. I worked at them day out, day in, building a sorrowful loveliness out of the battles of old times. You need but lift a pearl pale hand and bind up your long hair and sigh, and all men's hearts must burn and beat. And candle like foam on the dim sand, and stars climbing the dew-dropping sky, live but to light your passing feet.
He wishes for the cloths of heaven.
Had I the heavens' embroidered cloths, and wrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams.
And here is Maud Gunn again. After he complained to her that he was not happy without her, she replied, "Oh, yes, you are, because you make beautiful poetry out of what you call your unhappiness, and are happy in that. Marriage would be such a dull affair. Poets should never marry. The world should thank me for not marrying you." Was she right? Here's more of what her repeated refusals inspired. The next poem catches a moment when William and Maud walked by a river with willow embankments. Now in Gaelic, a willow is called a sally. The weir is a low dam in the river covered with slow-growing grass. This poem, set to folk tune, is still Ireland's most popular song, Down by the Sally Gardens.
Down by the Sally Gardens my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow-white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the tree. But I, being young and foolish, with her would not agree. In a field by the river my love and I did stand, and on my leaning shoulder she laid her snow-white hand. She bid me take life easy as the grass grows on the weirs. But I was young and foolish, and now am full of tears.
Full of tears. Still, Willie Yates wrote and wrote. Oh, do not love too long.
Sweetheart, do not love too long. I loved long and grew to be out of fashion like an old song. All through the years of our youth, neither could have known their own thought from the others. We were so much at one. But oh, in a minute she changed. Oh, do not love too long, or you will grow out of fashion like an old song.
He even scolds women for playing hard to get just for the fun of it. Never give all the heart.
Never give all the heart, for love will hardly seem worth thinking of to passionate women if it seems certain, and they never dream that it fades out from kiss to kiss. For everything that's lovely is but a brief, dreamy, kind delight. Oh, never give the heart outright, for they, for all smooth lips can say, have given their hearts up to the play. And who could play it well enough if deaf and dumb and blind with love? He that made this knows all the cost, for he gave all his heart and lost.
Willie and Maud drifted apart while she was in her political glory days. Still, he appeals to her in The Lover Pleads for Old Friends.
Though you are in your shining days, voices among the crowd and new friends busy with your praise, be not unkind or proud, but think about old friends the most. Time's bitter flood will rise, your beauty perish and be lost for all eyes but these eyes.
In 1917, Yates, in his 50s, proposed again to Maud, who is now a single mother of a young woman. Well, she turned him down a final time. So he immediately proposed to her 23-year-old daughter, Iseult Gunn. Here is Iseult. Iseult seriously considered the proposal, but finally she turned him down because she thought he was not really in love with her, and it would upset her mother too much. Yates addresses Iseult here in this next poem as "my dear," and at the same time, he scolds her mother, Maud, for pretending to forget their long romance. To a young girl.
My dear, I know more than another what makes your heart beat so. Not even your own mother can know it as I know, who broke my heart for her when the wild thought that she denies and has forgot set all her blood astir and glittered in her eyes.
Willie did try to make other relationships work. The lover mourns for the loss of love.
Pale brows, still hands, and dim hair, I had a beautiful friend and dreamed that the old despair would end in love in the end. She looked in my heart one day and saw your image was there. She has gone, weeping away.
He says that since Maud had always broken her promises, he found other friends in a deep sworn vow.
Others, because you did not keep that deep sworn vow, have been friends of mine. Yet, always when I look death in the face, when I clamber to the heights of sleep, or when I grow excited with wine, suddenly I meet your face.
His last Valentine to Maud is one of his most touching. Perhaps we should also take down a book of his poems that he recommends to her. Here she is. This is Maud Gunn in old age. Here is Yates's plea to her, when you are old.
When you are old and gray and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read, and dream of the soft look your eyes had once, and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead, and hid his face amid a crowd of stars.
He finally, after 5 refusals, gave up on Maud. Though she's in all his poems, whatever the subject. At age 52, he married a longtime friend who shared many of his interests, Georgiana Hyde Lees, 27 years younger than he. Here's Georgie. Together, they built a loving family with 2 children, Anne and Michael. There they are. He wrote a long, touching tribute to his newborn daughter. Here are a few lines that show what he hoped she would become, and not to be like some women in his life, Maud. Notice he brings in the linnet bird, the symbol of a lost way of life that he'd written about in his early idyllic poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree. He gazes at his infant daughter in her cradle during a storm and muses in a prayer for my daughter.
Once more the storm is howling, and half hid under this cradle hood and coverlid, my child sleeps on. And for an hour I have walked and prayed because of the great gloom that is in my mind. May she be granted beauty, and yet not beauty to make a stranger's eye distraught, or hers before a looking glass. For such, being made beautiful overmuch, consider beauty a sufficient end, lose natural kindness, and maybe the heart-revealing intimacy that chooses right and never find a friend. In courtesy, I'd have her chiefly learned, hearts are not had as a gift, but hearts are earned by those that are not entirely beautiful. Yet many that have played the fool for beauty's very self has charm made wise, and many a poor man that has roved, loved, and thought himself beloved, from a glad kindness cannot take his eyes. May she become a flourishing, hidden tree, that all her thoughts may like the linnet be, and have no business but dispensing round their magnanimities of sound, nor but in merriment begin a chase, nor but in merriment a quarrel. Oh, may she live like some green laurel rooted in one dear perpetual place.
I spent an afternoon with his daughter, Anne, then in her 70s, in her Dublin home. His prayers for her had been granted. She was thoughtful and courteous and kind. His love for little Anne grew, knowing someday, like the falcon, she would fly away. The sailing seven mentioned here is a cluster of stars in a cradle song.
The angels are stooping above your bed. They weary of trooping with the whimpering dead. God's laughing in heaven to see you so good. The sailing seven are gay with his mood. I sigh that kiss you, for I must own that I shall miss you when you have grown.
At the end of his life, Yates wants to be remembered not as a mere intellectual, but something deeper in his prayer for old age.
God, guard me from those thoughts men think in the mind alone. He that sings a lasting song thinks in a marrow bone. From all that makes a wise old man that can be praised of all, oh, what am I that I should not seem for the song's sake a fool? I pray, for fashion's word is out, and prayer comes round again, that I may seem, though I die old, a foolish, passionate man.
His passions still move our hearts. In the year he died, 1939, another war with Germany loomed. German novelist Thomas Mann asserted, "In our time, the destiny of man presents its meanings in political terms." Well, in this last poem, the aged Irish poet answers the German novelist. Human meaning isn't ultimately found in politics.
How can I, that girl standing there, my attention fix on Roman or on Russian or on Spanish politics? Yet here's a traveled man that knows what he talks about, and there's a politician that has both read and thought, and maybe what they say is true of war and war's alarms. But oh, that I were young again and held her in my arms.
Here then is Yates in his sunset years, giving a talk on the BBC, reading his poetry. For William Yates, as in 1 Corinthians 13, love lasted to the end. At this sunset of our lives, let's celebrate our loves found on Valentine's Day. Thank you. Jim?
Thank you, Nancy and Tom. What a beautiful, beautiful statement. And we do have time for Q&A for a response. So invite people to comment either by raising their hand, doing it verbally, or writing in the chat.
Raise your hand.
Raise your hand.
You
It
too.
was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
thank you, thank you. Oh, it was just beautiful.
Tom.
Yeah, let's start with.
I echo that compliment. It was
beautiful and moving and wonderful. It's just a delight to have poetry read aloud by two people who know how to read. And of course, the background material was extraordinarily helpful. I was wondering, both for Tom and for Nancy, if some of the material they had not previously read or were acquainted with, or whether they've been through his material a number of times, but going through it now in preparation, what struck them?
I did. What struck who?
Yeah, for Nancy and Tom, going through the material again of Yates's poetry and sort of rehearsing it and reading it in such a way as to give it its meaning. What really impacted them in preparation for this day?
Well, I think for me, and this is probably the umpteenth time I've done a program on Yates, is the depth of his love for her. I mean, there's a background story to that. He really allowed her space. He was not a nuisance. He allowed her to say when they met and for how long. And I think his patience all those years, that's what struck me the most. But I have to tell you, I get choked up reading these poems, and Tom does such a gorgeous job of reading, bringing out the soul of the poetry. But it's very moving for me to see someone who all his life loved a woman and didn't press her more than she could take. It's just a remarkable love that he had for her. And also, Georgie, everybody knew of his passion for Maud and her rejection of him. She wouldn't marry him for one thing because he was not as radical as she was. And also, she became a Catholic and he was a Protestant. So that was ruled out. But I suppose his patience for her strikes me every time as remarkable. Tom, what?
Well, what struck me was the difficulty of interpreting this material and of reading it in a Western voice and not an Irish voice. Had I done it in an Irish voice, well, you know, we could have probably gotten away with that. I'm not sure. But how does one do justice to genius?
I have a question. Nancy, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Tell us more about your meeting with the daughter, and are there any descendants of Yates still alive today?
There are through several generations. There are some. His son Michael became a senator and then a politician in European politics. He became the assistant director of the Secretary General of the United Nations. He was the assistant to that. And he was one of the founders of the Amnesty International. So he has, while not blood children who have survived, he has gifts in what he gave to others politically. Anne Yates never married. I'll tell you a little about a meeting with her. It was when I was doing my dissertation, writing my dissertation, and she knew Lady Gregory, who is my topic. She knew Lady Gregory when Anne was a child. So I wrote to her and said that Peter and I would be in Ireland and could I please meet with her? Well, the letter got sent to her brother Michael instead. So when I arrived in Ireland and called her and said who I was, I said this letter, she did not know who I was. And so she was very brusque, very abrupt with me. Who are you and what do you want? So I apologized for just popping in on her life like that and told her I wanted to talk to her about herself. And she invited us to come to her house in the south of Dublin in Dalkey. And we spent the whole afternoon there. Each time I would get up to say, I don't want to tire you out. She said, no, let's just talk some more. And she showed me an outer building that was her uncle, Jack, who was an artist, his studio, and showed me his paint box, and she was absolutely wonderful. But anyway, she did not marry or have children. And Michael had children who have not survived. So thanks for the question. I must tell you that in a prayer for my daughter, one of the things I asked her about that, a prayer for my daughter, since she's the subject, even though she's an infant. And she said she thought Father really had not been standing over her cradle, because they lived in a Norman tower and he worked at the top of it and could see the whole of the countryside. And she would have been down on the ground floor. So she said he probably wouldn't have seen me because he was working in the top floor. And one last thing about Anne and her father. Evidently, they had a rule in the house that there would be no noise when Yates was working. And she said to me, and he was always working. So on her 11th birthday, she was given a gramophone, a record player, and some vinyl records of Gregorian chants. And she started playing them. She did not know that her father was in the house. So he burst out of his study and said, "Is someone playing music?" And she went out very apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Father. I did not know that you were here. I'm so sorry." He said, "What was the music?" And she said, "It was Gregorian chants." He said, "Thank God." He said, "I thought I died and they'd sent me to heaven." So anyway, she was lovely. We corresponded after that too. So thanks for the question.
I'd like to make a comment. This is Dean. The Sally Gardens is set to music exquisitely, so I encourage you to listen to the Sally Gardens set to music.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was hoping I could get a recording of that and play it, but I thought it would be technically just another intrusion. And so I didn't, but it really is, it's a beautiful song. And you can Google it, Down by the Sally Gardens, and there are many recordings of it.
No, I was just going to say, Dean, I have a recording by the King Singers that I'd be happy to share with you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it is, it's beautiful. It's haunting melody, isn't it?
It is,
It's haunting,
absolutely.
yeah. Others?
My hand is raised. This is Helen.
Go ahead, Helen.
Yes. I sense a great deal of interest in this reading of classics and appreciation for this poet. Nancy, I have a memory going back a few years that you led some of us in a wonderful interpretation of a certain play. I am wondering, is there enough interest to start a theater group again? And would you consider being the impetus in helping to get us together? I would love to be part of something like
But
that.
that's a very interesting thought. Yes, for people who just want to read plays or to do it as reader theater, because we've done several readers theaters here.
I think readers theater is wonderful. And if we can do the occasional in person, then that's in action, that's fine. But I love the classics.
Thank you. The play I think you may be thinking of is a Lady Gregory play. Lady Gregory and Yates started what is now the Irish National Theatre, the Abbey Theatre.
Yes.
And Lady Gregory wrote one-act comedies. And her plays actually were more popular than Yates's. Yates's usually were plays in poetry about Irish folklore.
Yes.
But anyway, that play was called Spreading the News. And it was about village people gossiping and how the story changed and became hilarious. Yes, thanks.
And I remember Jack Lorimer. What a wonderful voice that man had.
Jack and you did another program that we did on Yates with a different theme.
Yes.
Helen, you raised your hand as well. No, sorry.
Well, I've just finished. Yeah.
Ron, you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
I think I wanted to find out from Nancy, what was the origin of your interest in Yates? When did this begin and why?
It was in a graduate course that I had when I was working on my doctorate. And it was about Yates, and I didn't really know a whole lot about him. And I discovered not only his poetry, but a play that no one had really figured out why he wrote this play. And I came up with a wild idea that eventually got published. And that's where I learned about him and then started reading his poetry and was just enchanted by it. I've written a couple papers on Yates that have gotten published. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
I wonder how many people might be interested in what happened to these main characters. So I looked up some of their dates. Yates, we know, died in 1939, and he was 74 years old. Maud outlived him by 14 years. She lived to, well, longer than that. She lived to the age of 87. Her daughter, Isolde, died the next year of heart failure. She died at the age of 59. Anne Yates lived to 2001 and died at the age of 83. And Michael Yates, who was this great politician, died in 2007. So I was surprised that they were still alive when I was doing so many other things. I thought you might like to know that. I can say one other thing about Georgie. Georgie, knowing full well what his adoration of Maud Gunn was, and of course Maud Gunn was known all over Europe. But Yates was really very true to Georgie. There are several times that Maud, who was not supposed to come back to Ireland, and she did. And one time when Georgie was great with child with Anne, Maud came in the middle of the night and banged on Yates's door because she was being pursued by the police, and she wanted a haven. And Yates turned her away. He said if he let her in, Georgie would die. And so he made his choice after all those years. He made his choice. Any other questions?
This needs to be done again.
Yes, another version.
I agree.
I had a question about the political poem that you began with that seems so unfortunately relevant. What year was that written, and what was going on that instigated his
Which
despair?
year? Which
The turning and turning in a widening gyre.
It's in the last volume. He called his last poems. So it was very close to 1939, but he died early in 1939, so it was probably sometime in the last year of his life. But he was making a collection called The Last Poems and put this in it. Isn't it a wonderful poem? I mean, every one of them, I think, oh, this is my favorite. That's one of my favorites. And all he wants to do is hold the young girl.
Yeah, what about the one about things fall apart?
Things Fall Apart was written in 1920. And, that was really the height of the Troubles trying to break away from England. And 4 years before that, there was in 1916, there was a disaster for the Irish who were rebelling against England, and many of them were executed, including the man who had been Maud Gunn's husband. So. Guess there aren't any more questions.
Well, Nancy, one line that sticks with me is Yeats in his poem to Maud, and you showed the picture of her as an older woman. And one of the lines was, "and love the sorrows of your changing face."
Yes.
And I'm sitting here looking at the computer. I'm looking at all the faces of people from Monte Vista Grove, and we look at each other all the time. And I think maybe when we're younger, we would say, well, those are a bunch of old fuddy-duddies. But now I love the changing faces that I see here right now, looking at the screen. So maybe Yeats can be a trigger to make us appreciate each other more as we grow older and more beautiful. And the other line I made a note on was when he talked about himself as a foolish, passionate man.
Oh, yeah.
So he never lost his passion, and he encourages us all not to lose our passion as well.
Yes, and I think you can tie that to early on Adam's curse, and talking about for the song's sake a fool. That he's making songs, and that's his passion, and that by some is thought to be very foolish, waste of time to be writing poetry.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've heard everybody. Thank you. So Tom and Nancy, we deeply appreciate what you've done. Helen has a good idea. Maybe we should start a readers theater group to just look at some of the classics. So let's think about that. Next week, our speaker is Mike Kinman, who is here's what he says about himself: a follower of a revolutionary Jesus, spouse, parent, Episcopal priest, and the 10th rector of All Saints Church in Pasadena. And All Saints Church in Pasadena has been a source of strength for all people who care about justice of all shapes and forms. Mike, before he came, was in St. Louis, very much involved in Ferguson, Missouri, and hopefully he'll say something about that. And the church has recently declared its 4 basic values. And the first value is radical inclusion, radical inclusion. So he'll talk about that. And of course, our theme for this year has been cultivating inclusive communities. So it really fits for us to have Mike come and speak to us. So please join us next Thursday at 4 o'clock for Mike Kinman, the rector at All Saints Episcopal Church. Thank you very much for watching us today.